r/Nosleep. Posted by u/Head-of-Spectre. I played the mall game, the prize was worth everything. Part 1. Have you ever lost someone you loved? Someone who was such an important part of your life, that losing them ripped everything out of you and left you as nothing but an empty husk? I have. Grief does things to a person. It can destroy them and the scars will never heal. Not really. Suddenly the world seems like a darker place. You wish you'd had more time and you cling to the memories of what time you did have. You wish that you could go back and have just one more minute with them. Just one. That's all you want. That was all I wanted. Abigail Swan believed that the world was a magical place. She'd been obsessed with mystery and seemed so certain that if she looked hard enough, she could pull back the veil and see the things that humanity was never meant to see. When I first asked her out, I did so before Halloween and our first date was during a local ghost walk. Seeing how excited she was as we followed the group from place to place and listened to the horrific tales of pain and suffering that haunted our lonely city streets only made me fall deeper in love with her. She had the most wonderful, mischievous grin that made her dark eyes sparkle, and that night led to many others. Abandoned cabins, deserted theme parks, quiet forests, we visited them all together as we grew from a cute high school couple into young lovers, planning our future together. As time went by, we talked of marriage, mortgages and even children. She wanted to get married in an abandoned church. Abigail was a force of nature. An unstoppable person who saw magic and beauty everywhere she went. And she made me see it too. Maybe if I'd taken a different route that day, I'd still have her with me. Some local kids decided to mix booze in Daddy's fast car. They ran a red light and hit me on the passenger side before I could react. The boys were fine. I spent 2 weeks in the hospital, and Abigail? She didn't even make it that far. The months after her death were the hardest. My body might have healed, but it was the only thing that did. I felt her absence in every waking moment. I pored over her old photographs as mutual friends offered me empty condolences. I knew they meant well. But their support didn't change what I'd lost. They didn't cushion the pain that I felt. Nothing really could. I would have given anything to undo what had been done or to even have one more minute with Abigail. Anything. That's why I did it. It's why I played the mall game. I didn't know if it would work, and I knew that in the unlikely event that it did, I'd probably end up killing myself in the process. But given the state I was in and what it promised, I couldn't say no. Like I said before, grief does things to a person. It sends them to dark places, and in those places, there are often other things waiting. I'd first heard about the mall game through Abigail. It's not a well-known ritual. I'd never heard of anyone who'd completed it successfully, but with all the details out there, someone must have. Those who attempted it usually failed to even start it correctly, although if you dig deep you might find some rumors of people who tried to play it and disappeared. Supposedly, if you manage to beat the mall game, you will be allowed access to another world. In there, you would have your choice of prizes. Worldly possessions, riches, knowledge, and if you so choose, an opportunity to speak to the dead. The catch is, you can only take one prize, and if you were to beat the mall game, you can never, ever play it again. You have one chance to play and one chance to win. In order to even play the game, you must have recently lost someone close to you, otherwise it won't work. However, if you have, and you are still reeling from the grief, you need to visit any large indoor mall of your choosing. It doesn't matter where it is. It just needs to be a large indoor mall. A strip mall won't work. You need to enter first thing in the morning and make sure that you are the very first one to set foot inside the mall that day. Then you need to approach the nearest kiosk and ask the person working there, "What time does the mall close today?" Their answer is very important. If they do anything other than smile at you and say, "Stay and find out," then you have failed. However, if they smile and they say those words, then the game begins. My city has a very large mall near the highway that I knew would serve my purposes perfectly. I made sure to be there bright and early on a weekday, when they might not be as busy in the morning. I thought it might be easier to be the first person inside that way. The mall opened at 10 in the morning, and when the doors were unlocked that day, I was inside before they had even fully opened. The underpaid employee who I'd pushed past shot me a dirty look as I made a beeline for the nearest kiosk. A cell phone provider. Common sense told me that this wouldn't work. Even if the mall game was real, it was such a long shot that I'd actually trigger it. But if it was, if I had a chance to speak to Abigail one last time, I needed to take it. I needed to see her again. The kiosk sat just ahead of me, and the employee there looked over at me as I drew closer. They probably thought I was there to browse or buy. There was no way they'd have expected the question I asked. "Excuse me, what time does the mall close?" Their initial expression was one of surprise and I felt my heart sink. I was so sure I'd failed at the first step. And then I saw their smile. Their eyes met mine, their gaze both knowing and mocking. "Stay and find out," they replied. Their tone was almost condescending. Those 4 words sent a chill through me. For a moment, I wasn't sure I'd actually heard them correctly. The kiosk employee chuckled and turned away from me, leaving me standing dumbfounded by their counter. Finally I pulled away as I realized that it had worked. I'd successfully begun the mall game. That knowledge filled me with both elation and a quiet dread. Elation because for the first time, I felt just the slightest spark of hope. Dread because I knew what would come next. The mall game is fundamentally a game of tag. By beginning it, you invite something else into the mall with you. Just what exactly it is up for debate. Most people just call it the hunter though. Some people said that the hunter would look like any other mall patron and they'd be difficult to pick out from a crowd. There would be subtle things to distinguish them, but it was never specified exactly what those things might be. What is agreed upon is that once the mall game has begun, you cannot exit the mall at any time because the hunter will continue to follow you if you do. The only way to get rid of it is to win the game, which is easier said than done. In order to win, you need to remain within the mall until it closes. You cannot be caught and you cannot leave. You must avoid the hunter until the hour before the mall closes, and then you begin the next step of the game. The mall I was in closed at 9. That left me with about 10 hours until the game was finished. I knew that the hunter would be entering soon and I had every intention of avoiding it when it came. I figured that I'd try a pragmatic approach. Obviously the hunter was going to come straight for me. So why not find a place where I'd be able to see it coming? Somewhere open and central. The food court for instance. I could feel nervous palpitations in my chest as I headed there, keeping a distance from any other shoppers I saw. No one that I passed stuck out to me in any noticeable way. They were just average people going about their business. The food court was more or less empty when I got there. Some of the restaurants weren't even open yet. The few that were didn't interest me. I doubted I'd be able to hold down any food that I ate. My stomach churned too much and I hadn't had much of an appetite in the past few weeks anyways. I found a table where I could look out on the rest of the mall and I waited, drumming my fingers impatiently on the table as I watched strangers pass by. I figured that anyone traveling in a group was probably safe. Everything I'd read suggested that there would only be one hunter, so I waited for it. I don't think I waited long either. My fingers drummed anxiously on the table as I saw a pale, bald man in a suit walking slowly past the food court. I expected him to look at me, but he remained stoic and looked straight ahead before he disappeared from my sight. I spotted a young mother and her 2 children entering the food court. The kids looked at me but they didn't seem all that threatening. I spotted a lonely old lady with a walk around the corner, but I didn't linger on her for long. My fingers kept drumming as I eyed a group of teenagers passing by and watched as they entered the food court. They were all pierced and dressed in black, although I noticed that one of them trailed behind the others. They looked at me and as they did, I realized that the air around me felt a little colder than before. My eyes remained locked on the androgynous teenager who frowned before looking at their phone and jogging to catch up to their friends. I watched them for a moment longer before conceding that they weren't the hunter. Although that new chill in the air made me uneasy. The room seemed darker than before and I looked over to the other side of the food court, hoping to catch sight of any newcomers before I noticed the old woman again. She weaved slowly through the tables as she approached me. Her serious eyes never left me and that intense glare made me feel uneasy. She couldn't have been more than 10 feet away from me, and as she slowly came closer, I felt the room getting colder as the lights around me dimmed. Her very presence seemed to cast a shadow and suck all the warmth from the air around her. My every instinct told me to get up, but my body would not obey. As the old woman closed the distance between us, I could feel the world around me going dark, and in that dark, I saw her features begin to change. Where once an old woman had stood, now stood something else entirely. It lurched towards me, its skin clammy and gray, its eyes sunken and skeletal, and yet what was beneath that rotten skin was only barely human. I saw blistered lips curl into a grin as fresh pus dribbled from the sores. My nostrils were filled with an overwhelming stench of coppery blood as the hunter drew nearer. I had foolishly come in believing that the mall game would be easy to play. I had thought I could easily evade the hunter once it revealed itself to me. No doubt I hadn't been the first to think that. Running sounds simple in concept, but when faced with what hides behind the veil, your body doesn't respond. You sit there, like a deer in the headlights, watching it come for you, throat full of gnashing rotten teeth and the stink of rotting flesh wafting from its threshing maw. I knew in that moment why others had gone missing. Either they hadn't seen the hunter coming or they'd been paralyzed with fear when they saw it, just like I was. I sat in that seat in the food court, pulled into whatever cold darkness the hunter had brought with it as it advanced on me. I knew that when it took me, no one would notice. I would be dismissed as another disappearance. And I would be forgotten. In what I was sure would be my final moments, I pictured Abigail and hoped that maybe I might see her on the other side. I imagined her mischievous smile and her sweet laugh. A laugh I would have done anything to hear again. Even that game. With the hunter only feet away from me, skeletal hands reaching for my throat to snatch me and drag me into its mouth, I found the strength to move. At last I screamed and launched myself backwards, off the chair. As I put some distance between myself and the hunter, I saw the world around me get brighter. A few strangers noticed me and looked over in my direction, but I paid them no mind. As I stumbled away from the hunter, I saw that it seemed more human. The further I got, the more it looked like a harmless old lady. The effect was similar to those images you see sometimes, when you move and the image changes into something else. Lenticular printing, I think it's called. Yet even with its harmless disguise back up, I still knew what that creature really was. I suppose in a sense, my plan had worked. In fact, it had worked too well. I knew what was after me. I knew exactly what it was, and even once I'd turned to run, I could still smell the rotting flesh of the idiots who'd tried and failed to play them all game before me. I must have looked like an idiot, taking off at top speed out of the food court and away from that harmless-looking old lady, but I didn't care. No one else would have seen what I'd seen, and if they did, God help them. I looked back only once as I left the food court, and I saw the old lady several feet behind me. She'd moved faster than I'd expected, but I'd still put some distance between us. I rushed up one of the nearby escalators to the second floor, where I was sure I'd be safe for the time being. From the second floor, I watched the old lady following me towards the escalator. She kept a steady pace and her gaze was always fixated directly on me. I looked back at her before turning to leave. I didn't run, but I kept a brisk pace, intending not to let her catch up to me again. The first hour was only barely done. I had 9 more to go. Part of me considered heading for the door of the mall, catching the bus and heading home. But the warnings I'd read had been clear. Leaving the mall at any time would not get rid of the hunter. The game would end, and the hunter would continue to pursue me until it inevitably got me. To leave would be to die, plain and simple. Judging by what I'd seen behind that harmless old lady facade, it would be a very painful death too. No. I wasn't going to leave. Not at all. Hiding was out of the question too. The hunter would know where I was immediately, so I'd only be wasting my time and possibly cornering myself as well. On the subject of cornering myself, going into any of the stores would probably also be a mistake. Mall stores generally only have one entrance that is also their exit. I didn't know how smart the hunter was, but if it happened to catch me in one of the smaller stores, all it would need to do is wait by the entrance for me to come out and it would have me. A better strategy seemed to be to simply keep moving. The mall had a circuit to it that I could follow. I could move between the upstairs and downstairs and it would allow me to stay ahead of the hunter. I'd just do laps around the mall for the day until it was time to find a store and end the game. I could do that, right? For the first couple of hours, things went well. I kept a close eye on the hunter, who I kept at about a 30-foot distance. It followed me up and down escalators, keeping its steady pace as it pursued me. Its eyes never once left me. Despite its appearance as an old lady, I figured that it moved just about as quickly as I did. Despite how terrifying my first encounter with it had been, I caught myself feeling confident that I might just win this after all. By the time noon had rolled around, my confidence was starting to wane. I'm not exactly a health nut, but I consider myself at least somewhat in shape. Keeping a brisk pace to keep the hunter away from me though was far more trying than I'd expected. As I felt myself starting to tire, I made myself get further ahead in the vain hope that if I put some distance between myself and the hunter, I might just buy myself some time to rest. It didn't take long to leave her behind as I headed back towards the food court. I was hoping that I might grab a drink or something to keep myself ready to go. There were no rules in the ritual explicitly forbidding you from stopping to eat or drink at any point in time. I'd even heard some people encouraging you to eat or buy food during the game. There would be no opportunity to eat for some time once it was all over. I was on the second floor and was getting close to the escalator that led down towards the food court when I felt a familiar drop in the temperature around me. I paused and looked backwards, expecting to see the hunter behind me, but there was no one. The lights around me were starting to dim again and I remained frozen, unsure of what was close to me. Was there something else nearby? A second hunter perhaps? The descriptions I'd read hadn't said anything about that. Then from the corner of my eye I saw her. I'm not sure when she got down to the lower level or when she'd caught up to me, but there she was. That same little old lady riding the escalator up to me. Her eyes were fixated on me like they always were, and I could see something shifting behind her human facade. I recoiled on instinct away from the escalator and broke into a run, putting some more distance between us. Not too much this time. I didn't want to lose track of her again. I watched as she reached the top of the escalator and resumed her steady pursuit of me. I could hear my blood pounding in my ears, and I could have sworn I saw a wry smile on her lips. Suddenly I wasn't very thirsty anymore. Over the next few hours, I kept moving. Whenever I got tired or wanted to stop, she was there. I learned very quickly that if I got too far ahead of her, she'd find a way to get close to me again. About 5 hours into the game, I saw her come out of a store in front of me when I was sure she'd been behind me. Not long after, I saw her coming straight for me when again, I'd last seen her 20 feet behind me. As the day went on, she became more and more aggressive. The mall itself began to feel wrong. I was sure I'd followed the circuit that led around the mall exclusively. However, every now and then, I'd find myself disoriented. Routes that had looped around last time seemed to end indoors out. Stores that I'd passed before began to pop up in the wrong places. Maybe it was just the exhaustion, or maybe it was something else entirely. Through it all, that goddamn old lady behind me kept up her brisk pace, and so did I. I made myself move just a little slower, choose my paths more deliberately. Near the end of it, my legs felt sore as if I'd been hiking all day. I was thirsty, hungry and tired. Every little group of benches or chairs I passed looked so inviting that I considered resting for just a moment. I only actually tried it once. As soon as I'd sat down, I felt the air grow colder and saw the lights around me growing dim. The first 2 times it had frightened me. This time it angered me. From the corner of my eye, I saw the hunter approaching and I growled in frustration. Something deep, primal and angry in me made me want to lash out at it. A far more rational part of my mind told me to run. Despite my mind telling me to fight, I chose to run anyways. When I finally heard the announcement, I can't tell you how tired I was. "Attention shoppers," a voice said over the intercom, "the mall will be closing in 1 hour.